attention to the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center towers in New York City on September 11, 2001, and a whole lot more. This is 9/11 Freefall. Hello, everybody. I'm Bernie Suarez. I'm here with Andrew Steele, and we're coming to you on the internet all around the world via nolinesradio.org. We're available here on 911freefall.com, where you can tune in to all of our previous shows. Hi, everybody, and welcome to 9/11 Freefall. This radio show is committed to the truth of 9/11. We are committed to the scientific evidence surrounding the events of September 11th. We are committed to exposing the official story of 9/11 put out by the establishment and mainstream media. And we are committed to bringing attention to organizations that focus on the facts of 9/11 and the science, primarily an organization we talk about all the time, Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. This is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the pursuit of academic truth with respect to the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center towers on September 11th. Well, Andy Steele, how are you today? I'm excited to be here for yet another week of 9/11 Freefall.
Well, when you're committed and you're driven to a cause as big as 9/11 Truth, Bernie, your mood doesn't change. You know, I see my eyes on the prize, and we're going to expose this tremendous crime that happened 11 years ago. And I've been looking forward to this episode all week. You know, last week we did our special hour-and-a-half-long show on the mainstream media. We played all these clips of these pundits, and you know, why would I want to do that to our audience? Why would I want to subject them to Glenn Beck and to Bill O'Reilly and to Sean Hannity? Well, it's to expose this, because when you play these clips one after another, you see a portrait being painted of just how scared the mainstream media is of the truth coming out. So I consider that almost like this is like a sandwich in our offensive on the mainstream media. You know, that's the bread. You know, the people like Glenn Beck, Bill O'Reilly, they're debunked just by opening their mouths. You know, and we're just playing those clips pretty much exposes them. But now we're getting into the meat of it on this show. And I've been looking forward to this all week. We're going to be taking on Popular Mechanics and their pseudoscience at that publication. So, you know, I'm very excited to be here, like always.
I am very excited about that. Popular Mechanics. Wow. These guys are unbelievable. They have a tremendous impact on this fight for truth, as people just, they see Popular Mechanics as this voice of reason and science. And there's nothing reasonable and scientific about what they have to say. All right. Well, just breaking news here on Glenn Beck, everybody. Just kidding. Yes, to officially let everyone know, Glenn Beck has not gotten back to us. And that challenge, we put out several challenges for him. Primarily, Glenn Beck, we're challenging Glenn Beck to watch 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out, the documentary, and to watch it and tell us where we're wrong. And maybe Glenn Beck's been listening to Popular Mechanics. That might be the problem. But the challenge is out there. Glenn and your people, whoever's listening, please, we're challenging you to watch 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out. So, and with that, last week we talked about, as you said, Andy, a lot of this media censorship and these pundits that are all the time opening their mouths, and Glenn Beck thinks 9/11 truthers are dangerous for all kinds of political reasons, but the truth is 9/11 Truth is solidly grounded on the science and reason, and is solidly grounded on reproducible evidence, and we're going to hear about a lot of the work that's been done. We've been hearing about it every week, and this week we're going to talk about the other side of the argument, the unreasonable computer simulation-based science that has been put out by National Institute of Standard Technology and then kind of reiterated by Popular Mechanics. So, all right, well, we're going to continue, as you said, Andy, with this theme, and we're going to deal with more of the academic side of this stuff.
And Bernie, I just want to jump in here. One thing, I want to put this out to the audience, and I want to expand your challenge, because Glenn Beck talks about 9/11 truth being dangerous, and maybe in one sense he's right in terms of being dangerous to his worldview and his fragile ego and this facade that he and the mainstream media have been putting up. So I want to expand this challenge to our listeners. Maybe Glenn Beck needs some prompting. Maybe if you see that he's going to be speaking somewhere in your town, you can get a copy of Experts Speak Out and present it to him. Present it to him on camera. Let the world know that he's been informed that this exists. Everywhere he goes, show him Experts Speak Out, confront him, and let him know that his baseless attacks are not going to escape public scrutiny. Is not going to escape the light of truth.
Yeah, and then you whisper in his ear saying, "I'm not dangerous." Or maybe, just don't tell him you're a 9/11 truther somehow. I guess, I don't know how that works. So if he thinks 9/11 truthers are dangerous, maybe get all the security people all over you. I don't know, who knows. Okay, well, we're going to move on, Andy. And while it's going on, I know there's a lot of 9/11 news going on. We know the Experts Speak Out documentary hit number 1, according to the Colorado public television and all that, and the PBS network. So that documentary has been very successful. A lot of people want to know what's going on. They're curious. They're interested in this kind of stuff. A lot of things going on out there for 9/11 Truth, Andy.
Well, there is. Especially around this time in September when a lot of activism happens. But it doesn't just have to be in September. It can be all year around. And a lot of the things that are happening in 9/11 Truth are things that are not necessarily reported in the mainstream news. But there was an article, and I wasn't even prepared to talk about this today, so I'm calling it up as we speak, but a very good article out in the quote-unquote mainstream. I don't even like to use that word mainstream because, right now we are the mainstream, or we're a part of the mainstream media. But the title of the article was... Bear with me for a moment. 9/11 doubts seep into the mainstream as evidence accumulates, and this was put out by Salem News. And I'm not going to read the article to you. You can Google that title and find it for yourself. But basically, the title says it all itself, and I can see this in people I talk to. And other world events are helping this along as well, is making people look at this, like I always say, with a less emotional eye. But people are starting to come out. They're starting to disassociate their identity from their politicians and their government and realize that they are themselves free people, free to speak out against the actions of the government in covering up the science truth. Mm-hmm. And they can talk about it more freely. You can see that happening now, and there's a tremendous awakening happening.
Yeah, I agree. I see that happening. A lot of responses to the documentary that was put out by architects and engineers. And there's a lot of other people putting out information and documentaries. This information is becoming more acceptable. I know out here in L.A., we had an outreach, and a lot of people are receptive to this information where they weren't just a few years ago. Amazing what science and reason will do to you. That's why we do what we do, right? I have to remind our audience that there's also the two ladies that we had out here, Rena Patty and Pam Senzi, are still on the road. They're bicycling across America to get this same message across, handing DVDs, that is Experts Speak Out DVDs from architects and engineers, to firefighters, police, politicians, or anyone that'll take them. So that's another effort we want to remind everyone. You can check that out and follow their journey on 911journeyfortruth.org. And let's see what Pam and Rena are up to. So they can always use your support. Well, this stuff is happening everywhere. It's despite the grounds that we're gaining across the world, we still have to deal with censorship. So that's what we're going to be dealing with today. And before we go any further, Andy, we're going to take a break here, and before we start our segment this week, and the first thing we're going to do is take 10 seconds of silence. And for anybody who's new to this show, we do this every week just to remember the victims of 9/11 and not only their families, but everyone else who has suffered from that event. So we'll take 10 seconds of silence starting now. And with that, we conclude that. All right. Well, I want to take this this moment here to remind our audience that the opinions expressed on the show, 9/11 Freefall and 9/11freefall.com, are our opinions and our expressions. They do not necessarily represent the opinions and mission statements or anything else of any other organization, including architects, engineers for 9/11 Truth. So, all right. Well, before we go any further, I always like to sneak in a little question. I know most of the time I throw out a question, but sometimes I forget. But this week I've got a question, Andy, and this week's question, the question of the week, is what should be the punishment for the crime of academic fraud? And who should be punished? Should the individual be punished, or the corporations, or both? So there you go. You can tell where we're going with this thing this week. Again, what should be the punishment for the crime of academic fraud, and who should be punished? Should the individuals be punished, the corporations, or both? And Andy, I always answer my own questions of the week. I say both. And I think the punishment should be no less than prison time or something along those lines. All right.
Yeah, and my answer too, I just want to quickly answer. To me, it depends on motive. Now, if it's just that you have this worldview that you want to protect and an ego to protect, and you commit academic fraud with this issue of 9/11 Truth, well, there's certain processes within universities and in the academic world to punish that, and obviously the court of public opinion will condemn you for the rest of your life, especially on an issue like this. Now, if it turns out that you are aware that you are a part of a cover-up, that you are purposely covering up a massive crime, that you actually know the truth, and you're purposely manipulating the data, then certainly, yeah, I mean, prison time is in effect after, obviously a fair trial, but this is serious stuff, folks. This is not like, arguing some obscure scientific or philosophical issue. This is the death of nearly 3,000 people and a changing of our foreign policy and domestic policy as a result.
And the death of a lot of other people after that, a lot
exactly
than the people that died on that day as a result of this planned event, it obviously appears. Well, good and well said, Andy. I guess that would be a warning to Popular Mechanics, because the guest that we have today is going to be talking about popular mechanics and a lot more. And, let's introduce him now. Our guest here today, his name is Adam Taylor. He has been an activist and a researcher in 9/11 Truth since 2007. And Adam Taylor is a contributing writer to the blog site known as Debunking the Debunkers of 9/11 Truth movement. So that's the blog site. The web address for that is 911debunkers.blogspot.com. So go ahead and check that out. He's a contributing blogger there. Adam is also a volunteer writer and researcher for architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, which an organization that we speak about a lot. So that's pretty amazing there. And, Adam has a YouTube channel. You can check him out there at Citizen for 911 Truth, and then the number 1. Again, that's Citizen for FOR, and that's 911 Truth, the number 1. And go check out his channel there. And he's also an author of a series of articles, and they're called Debunking the Real 9/11 Myths, Why Popular Mechanics Can't Face Up to Reality. So with that said, Adam Taylor, hello, welcome to 9/11 Freefall. Thank you for coming on the show.
Hey guys, thank you very much for having me on today.
All right. Well, Adam, again, thanks for coming on. Now, tell us, before we get into the articles and a lot of your work here exposing popular mechanics, just tell us briefly, now, how did you get into 9/11 Truth? And tell us a little bit about that and your background there.
Well, as you said, I've been looking into this since 2007. Specifically, it was in August of 2007. When I was flipping through the channels on TV, I came across a documentary on the History Channel that talked about the, so-called conspiracy theories about 9/11, and that kind of got me interested, made me curious, so I decided I think I should look into this. And, I got onto some really good 9/11 Truth websites, saw some good documentaries made by members of the movement, and after, I'd say at least a month of researching it, maybe 2 months, I was almost totally convinced and thought, there's something really wrong with 9/11. I got to keep looking into this because there's a lot of unanswered questions.
Amazing. Well, let me interrupt you. So let me ask you, when you first saw the buildings come down on September 11th, where were you? Were you like me, or like a lot of us, we just blindly accepted the official story from top to bottom? Is that the case with you?
Well, when 9/11 happened, I was pretty young. I was still just a kid and didn't really know how to comprehend it at the time. And in terms of the building collapses, I was like, well, what do I know? I'm just a kid. I don't have any expertise in engineering. But when I was older and could look at this more carefully and could listen to what the science experts were saying that were in the movement, a lot of what they said made sense to me. A lot of stuff that, you don't have to be an engineer or an architect to understand. It's just common sense stuff. So, to me, now it's obvious that the Twin Towers and Building 7 were demolished with explosives, and that's been the main area that I've been researching since I got into this.
Right. Well, great. Well, tell us then, please, go on. Now, you have analyzed this. You've put a lot of material based. Tell us about the Popular Mechanics book that they put out, I guess, initially in 2006. And tell us, the audience, for our audience who's never tuned in, Popular Mechanics has put out a book, and Adam's going to tell us more about this whole analysis of the demolition of the towers. They get into all these other topics. Now, let's even, I'm gonna jump in and interrupt my own question. Let's go even further back. As far as Popular Mechanics, now, who sanctioned these guys to make themselves the official voice of reason? Now, I assume that they just self-appointed themselves to start writing all this 9/11 stuff, because not every organization does that. So that's another thing our audience should understand. This is a private organization, Popular Mechanics. Many people have probably read their magazines. They all of a sudden they come out of the gate. Now, am I correct? Was it in 2006 these guys come out and jump into the game, or were they involved in this game, in this 9/11 game, from the beginning?
I think the way it worked is that they initially put out a magazine article, just in their magazine, titled something like "Debunking 9/11 Lies," and that was in 2005. In 2006, they updated it into a full book, where they wanted to go into more detail regarding the arguments from the Truth Movement. And since then, they've put out an updated version of that book in 2011, where they've tried to be more up-to-date with the new evidence that the Truth Movement has presented.
And before you get into that, I just want to dwell on this, and don't mind me, and maybe I'm on my own on this, but I find it amazing that a private organization, for profit, who puts out magazines on these issues. Obviously, the topics, Popular Mechanics. I've never been a subscriber to that magazine, or I don't even know that I've even read any of their. Or it's been a while. I find it interesting, just politically speaking, how they make themselves the voice of reason for this event, which is a very politically tied. I mean, this event has so many political implications. It's unbelievable. And here comes this private corporation jumping into the game and going as far as attacking 9/11 Truth. Now, So I want to, just dwell on that a little bit, but I find it amazing that they would do that, and we don't know of anybody who sanctioned them. I mean, we know that NIST was appointed by NIST is part of the U.S. Government of Commerce, so we understand where NIST came into play and where the 9/11 Commission came into play and all that. But it's amazing how this organization, Popular Mechanics, jumps in. So go on now. Tell us about this book and how that started and where they went with it. And go on.
Sure. Well, basically, like I said, the point of this new 2011 book is they wanted to essentially be up to date with the new stuff that the truth movement's talked about since they first released their book back in 2006. I'd say between the two books, their new one is not vastly different in terms of the subjects they address. The three areas that they updated their book on the most, I'll say here, is regarding the active thermetic material discovered in the dust from the 9/11 World Trade Center catastrophe paper that was put out in 2009. They do take on that issue. They address the issue surrounding Barry Jennings and his death, and they also address the new 2008 report on Building 7 that NIST came out with. But other than that, a lot of what they talk about is actually what they talk about in their 2006 book. And in fact, I'll talk about a lot of what's the same and, importantly, stuff that shouldn't be the same, stuff that they should have updated but apparently chose not to. Just a word on I want to talk about the structure of the book itself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'll just say the structure of the book itself is very bad. Their source citation is very shoddy. They hardly source much of what they talk about. Now, obviously, a lot of the sources they have are interviews they themselves did with experts trying to debunk the truth movement, so you really can't go back to that. You kind of have to take their word for it.
Now, with these experts that they're interviewing, do they reveal their names, or you're saying that do you get the sense that they're covering up someone else's ability to track their data and their experiments and their claims? Are these people reachable?
They do give the names. I'm not exactly sure how these people could be reached, but some of them are, people from official investigations, like from NIST.
Now we know that the I'm sorry to interrupt you. We know that the NIST, all of it, is based on computer simulations, and I can only imagine that we're talking about claims. And this is the signature with all government state crimes. They have all these claims, and they have never produced any experiments or anything. I assume that is the case again. If not, please send me. I offer cash reward for those types of experiments.
And I want to just mention something, Bernie, and I want to ask this of Adam. Something, when I read your article, something that really jumped out at me, and obviously in your writing I can see it really jumped out at you because it's like one of the first things you mentioned. But you mentioned this quote in part 1 of the report, and I'm going to just read it. This is from the Popular Mechanics book. Though Reynolds and a handful of other skeptics cite academic credentials to lend credence to their views, not one of the leading conspiracy theorists has a background in engineering, construction, or related fields. Now, they wrote this in 2006, but they kept it in 2011 update. Now, obviously, that's not true. We have a petition, AE 9/11 Truth, proving this. We have Richard Gage touring the country. He's a licensed architect. We have tons of engineers. We've interviewed him on the show. I mean, this show alone debunks that claim. Now, so, everybody knows my initial reaction to hearing this inaccurate statement, but can you kind of go into yours and discuss this?
Yeah, I was pretty shocked when I read that. I couldn't believe that they would actually put this in their book. And after I read this, I actually went back and checked their 2006 book and saw that it's the exact same passage on the exact same pages. And that was pretty surprising. I figured either Popular Mechanics has got to be the worst journalistic group ever to miss 1,700 engineering professionals, or they're just being deliberately deceptive, which I kind of feel like the latter is probably the more likely case.
Well, I do too, and I just want to add to that. There's no way that Popular Mechanics doesn't know about AE 9/11 Truth. I don't believe that there's any leaders in the truth movement, but it's one of the most prominent voices because it brings the science, and so they have to know it exists. That lends me, and I'll go out on a limb and just say it. I mean, they deliberately are skewing the facts. They're deliberately overlooking this to put it out there. I'm going to state it right here.
It doesn't take a rocket science. I agree with Andy there. This is... they don't have any experiments, they don't have any data, and that's the bottom line. In the scientific method, you have to produce your evidence. You can't just make claims. So I agree with all you guys, and I'm following this other thread here saying these guys are private. They appointed themselves as the voice of reason. They're putting out this information without any data, any experiment. None of this is legitimate, just on that alone. But your points are amazing, very good points on that. They just are, this is totally illegitimate organization putting out false information for political reasons.
Yeah, well, obviously Popular Mechanics would be aware of architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, because the fact is the CBC documentary that aired in 2009 had Richard Gage in it and had Jim Meigs from Popular Mechanics. So either they didn't watch even documentaries that they themselves were featured in, or again, they're just deliberately ignoring all of these experts that we do have. And in fact, throughout their book, there's not one mention of 9/11 Truth, no mention of Richard Gage. It's like the whole group doesn't even exist.
Adam, you mentioned that they updated in the 2011 version of the book the section, or they included information on nanothermite and the use of nanothermite in the towers. You want to elaborate on that for a few minutes? And because what we do know, right, Andy, and this information was posted on Architects and Engineers website, the AE911truth.org, a few months ago. An article was discovered from Popular Mechanics magazine way back in 1935, where they described the use of thermite to destroy was it right?
It was actually the Skyride Tower.
Okay, and they describe the use of thermite. So back to that, anything you want to add, Adam, regarding this, when they included and mentioned the information on nanothermite?
Sure. Well, that section, I was curious as to what they were going to say. Were they actually going to provide some, scientific criticism of the paper? And surprise, surprise, they didn't. They mentioned two incidents that happened, really that they cite only to try to discredit the findings of the ATM paper. The one incident they cite is how these two scientists submitted a hoax paper to the journal same journal that the ATM paper was published in. And it was kind of a joke paper with, kind of dumb stuff in it. To see that they wanted to see if the paper would get accepted, to try to discredit the journal that the ATM paper was published in. The paper was accepted, but it was only accepted really so that they could find out who the authors were. It wasn't really being accepted because, they were going to take it and publish it. But not only has Popular Mechanics jumped onto this and cited as proof that the journal is a bad journal, but other debunkers have done the same thing. But the fact is, this little experiment these two scientists did try to discredit the paper really was nothing. It only cited one random incident, and I think the paper was actually rejected by another journal that's part of the same journal company sent them. So that is nothing. It's just them trying to discredit the paper rather than address it scientifically.
So for the sake of our audience who may not understand how these papers work or what makes a paper legitimate, Adam, do you want to kind of summarize that? So basically we're talking about a paper that they put out and they got it into a journal and that is supposed to give it legitimacy? Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, what they basically did is it was this paper where they, something along the lines of a crap paper, I think that's what they called it. And they were just trying to show that this journal is not responsible, essentially, that they'll publish anything as long as you pay to have it published, which is true. It is an open access journal. You do pay a fee to get it published, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad journal. It just means that it's open access so that people can have, more easy access to it so that other people themselves don't have to pay a fee to read it. The authors of the ATM paper did this to make sure that this information was easy for people to see, and they didn't have to pay a lot to view it. The other incident that Popular Mechanics cite to try to discredit the paper, again, it's all about discrediting. It's not about addressing it scientifically. They cite how the editor-in-chief at the Bentham Journal rejected the paper and said that she quit over this paper and said that she wasn't going to review it because it shouldn't be in the journal, and that she said she didn't review it because it lies outside her area of expertise. But it was demonstrated that is itself not true, because looking up her credentials, she actually has a lot of experience in fields of explosives, which is just what this paper talks about. So the bottom line there is her story doesn't add up.
And the bottom line, it sounds like Popular Mechanics just basically resorted to dirty tactics to simply try to discredit a solid scientific paper, and that seems to be their defense. Interesting.
And I wanted to just ask, because you mentioned Stephen Jones's name, and I wanted you to go over this on the show. Now, they went after Stephen Jones, talking about the melted steel at Ground Zero issue. Can you, from your article, kind of summarize and go over that with our audience?
Right. Well, they try to discredit the idea of molten metal by citing a few experts. One of them, I believe, is Professor Pence, I think is his name, and Alan Pence, who's a metallurgical engineering professor, and he suggests that some of the molten metal that's seen in photographs may be something more like molten glass, that the glass could have become molten and heated up and just look like molten steel. But the problem with that is we've got actual analysis of molten metal from Ground Zero. Stephen Jones has looked at it and shows that much of it is molten iron. It's not molten glass or even molten aluminum, for that matter. It's molten iron. And also, even if he was right that some of the pictures show molten glass, from what I've read, glass doesn't start to give off any, color until it reaches over 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, which is still extremely high temperatures to exist in the debris at Ground Zero.
Amazing. And the one thing I want to bring up as I listen to you speak, Adam, is that it seems to be that Popular Mechanics committed to a tactic based, as you have said it already, just trying to discredit. That is just that when you learn science in high school, and you compare one thing to another within a science textbook, usually what you do is you create your hypothesis and then you undergo your experiments and your data, and then you prove your point. But instead, they're committed to this underground sort of discrediting, slandering, or just trying to look for hooks and corners, just things to bend around. So that is not the scientific method, people. I mean, that's the whole point of what I'm trying to say here. And that is nothing scientific about that. That's just political.
Exactly. And I just want to, I want to bring this up and have Adam talk about this too, because you're talking about discrediting. Now, I think it's in part 3 of your report. And again, folks, we're going to put this up on 911freefall.com for you to read for yourself. But on part 3, Adam, you tell what I call, and what I would title as a tale of two experts, Dr. Keith Seffin and Dr. Crockett Grab, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. But what you wrote was really interesting to me about these two people. So I'm going to let you tell the story, about your expose and your findings regarding their analysis of the collapse of the World Trade Center towers with our audience.
Well, first of all, the first person, Dr. Keith Seffin, is a mathematician at the University of Cambridge. In 2007, he put out a paper called Progressive Collapse of the World Trade Center, A Simple Analysis, and this is in the Journal of Engineering Mechanics. And this paper supports, the natural collapse hypothesis and is kind of a rehashing of the points that have been made by one engineering professor, Dr. Zdeněk Blazant, with his crush down and crush up model. Now, popular mechanics cite him to try to discredit the movement, saying that we've got good scientific refutations of demolition theories. And when they talk about the truth movement's response to this person, they cite one person who refers to Dr. Stephan as an accessory to mass murder. Now, I thought this was interesting that they would cite this guy. And by the way, the source for this quote, I actually had to do a fair amount of digging. This kind of gets back to what I talked about, how their source citing is very bad. And this is something they do throughout the book. Whenever they cite anybody associated with the truth movement, they'll provide a quote, and then they'll provide the person's website, but they provide no direct link on the website to the quote. So you basically have to go and hunt it down yourself. In this case, they gave this person's website and the quote, but I went to this guy's site and couldn't find this quote anywhere. So after a fair amount of digging, I found the quote, and it's actually just from some random blog that just talks about Keith Stephan's paper, and he was just making a comment in the comment section. Now, the reason I found this interesting, PM had to do, or Popular Mechanics rather, they had to do a lot of digging to find this quote on this very obscure website. But there is another response to this paper that they could have cited, and it's a response paper by the individual you mentioned, Dr. Crockett Graby, who is a very, very well-credentialed scientist who's written a lot on the collapse of the World Trade Center. And he submitted a response paper in the same journal, in the Journal of Engineering Mechanics, to respond to Keith Stephan's paper. And he pretty much just debunks the entire thing. But PM totally ignores it. They ignore the fact that there was an actual, real scientific response to this paper, and instead they just quote some random guy online calling Dr. Stephan a murderer.
Dr. Stephan didn't respond to and I'm going to correct my pronunciation here, Dr. Graby at all. Isn't that correct? He didn't. I mean, silence was the answer.
You mean Dr. Stephan? Yeah, he didn't respond to Dr. Graby's response paper. So, that itself tells you that his paper, Dr. Graby's paper, has gone unchallenged in peer-reviewed literature. Mm-hmm. And that's an important point to keep in mind, too. When debunkers say that, the movement doesn't have any papers in respect to engineering journals, that's totally false. We now have several papers in engineering journals and more on the way.
That's true, and one of the things that I always point out, I challenge everyone and anyone, the truth papers or the work that has been done, and we haven't even mentioned, we talked about nanothermite earlier, and I don't know what I'm sure Popular Mechanics doesn't want to talk about this either, and that is that you have at least 3 organizations, not only Stephen Jones, but I believe, is it R.J. Lee and is it SGS? All 3 separate papers, all confirming the presence of the nanothermite chip. So I assume Popular Mechanics just ignores that, right?
Pretty much. The 2 other groups, they document the iron microspheres in the dust, mm-hmm. which is a byproduct of the thermite.
Right. Amazing. So we see this unbelievable pattern, and this is the take-home message that we want people to see, is that the entire official story is grounded on computer model simulations, and then a bunch of tactics that these people use. In this week's show, we're highlighting the behavior and the tactics used by popular mechanics to attack the truth, the 9/11 truth. So obviously they have an agenda, and obviously they're working with others that are on that agenda to what we call a censor 9/11 truth. So I don't know. This issue is bigger than we think. I mean, this is the reason why, Andy and I talked about last week. We were talking about Glenn Beck and Bill O'Reilly and all these guys. But this is where they get their fuel, and this is where so many Americans kind of just default their logic and their reason on the laps of popular mechanics, NIST, and these government entities and these people that are purposely controlling the science. They're sabotaging the truth and reason. So,
and they're obscuring things too. And something I want to make sure that we get on the air today. I want to ask Adam this question here, to ask him to go over this, because popular mechanics talks about, there's a section where they talk about the Empire State Building that Adam writes about, and they claim the World Trade Center towers were not structurally sound enough to withstand these airplane impacts. And Adam, you quote Emery Roth and Sons, which was the architectural firm that designed the Twin Towers, and what they wrote about the towers at one point. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Well, the Emery Roth and Sons firm basically put out a telegram talking about the structural design of the towers compared to the Empire State Building. And I'm going to try to quote from them right here just so that people can read this. If people want to read this, there's a good link to a website called 911research.wtc7.net that has this full quote. It would be 911research.wtc7.net/wtc/analysis/design.html.
And we're going to get a link up on the show webpage. We'll throw that up there for them to read.
Okay. For those of you listening, again, that's 911research.wtc7.net.
Right. The quote from the firm they put out says, quote, "The structural analysis carried out by the firm of Worthington, Skilling, Hell, and Jackson is the most complete and detailed of any ever made for any building structure. The preliminary calculations alone cover 1,200 pages and involve over 100 detailed drawings. Because of its configuration, which is essentially that of a steel beam 209 inches deep, the towers are actually far less daring structurally than a conventional building, such as the Empire State Building, where the spine or braced area of the building is far smaller in relation to its height. The building, as designed, is 16 times stiffer than a conventional structure. The design concept is so sound that the structural engineer has been able to be ultra-conservative in his design without it adversely affecting the economics of the structure," end quote. So right there you have them saying that these buildings were very soundly designed, if anything, more soundly designed than the Empire State Building. So, the idea that these buildings were not as well designed and more likely to collapse just seems groundless.
Absolutely. That's just another tactic that they use. We've heard the argument about I've had people tell me the buildings were light, somehow. They're supposed to crumble. They didn't crumble in 93 when that bomb went off in the basement.
Well, and then that's funny, too, because I'm going to quote right from your article, Adam, your own words here. It says, you write here, "It is quite apparent that the towers were extremely well built and may have been even more structurally sound than the Empire State Building. Even those supporting the official conspiracy theory praised the building's structural integrity as designed, such as Thomas Eager." And this is Thomas Eager's quote. "The towers withstood the initial impact of the aircraft. The buildings had more than 1,000 times the mass of the aircraft. This ability to withstand initial impact is hardly surprising." Yeah.
Even people who support the official story acknowledge that these buildings were very well built, and, they're going to say that it was the fires that were the main things that knocked the buildings down. But as I go into other places in my paper, even that's unsupported.
Adam, you mentioned in the list of items that they covered. Just tell us a word or two on what was mentioned regarding the death of Barry Jennings. I'm surprised they even addressed this issue. I mean, what does Popular Mechanics know about that? But people, when you have a political agenda, anything is fair game. Tell us a little bit about the death of Barry Jennings and how did they address this, or did they?
Well, they talk about it. They focus more on his death more than they focus on his testimony, which is what's been very significant. For those who don't know, Barry Jennings was in Building 7 on the morning of 9/11 with another gentleman named Michael Hess, and they were both trapped in the building from what at the time both of them described as an explosion that occurred in the building. That they were going down the stairwells, and an explosion happened and trapped them both on the stairwells. Now,
I was going to say, we did focus on that a few weeks ago. Andy and I we played testimony on the show for our audience to listen to from Barry Jennings, who told the story exactly. This guy, Building 7, he describes how the lobby within minutes was pristine 1 minute and blown to smithereens on another, and the explosion was below him. He clarified and confirmed that both buildings were still standing at the time of these explosions. But go on.
Well, I was hoping that Popular Mechanics would address just his testimony of the explosives, or the explosions that happened, hopefully delving into that, but they pretty much just blow it off in order to just address the mysterious circumstances surrounding his death. In fact, I want to quote just from their book so people can hear this to know how not only are they ignoring the real issue, but they distort it too. This is from page 81 of their book. They say, quote, "In 2007, Jennings, the father of 4, gave an interview to the producers of Loose Change, alleging that he heard explosions in Building 7 before it collapsed. I'm just confused about why World Trade Center 7 went down in the first place," he says on camera. "I know what I heard explosions. In that instant, Jennings became conspiracy theorist's sole eyewitness for a Building 7 controlled demolition scenario. This analysis of the emergency response at the World Trade Center alludes to Jennings' story and provides a timeline suggesting the explosions he heard were actually the collapse of WTC-1 roughly 300 feet away, along with the subsequent debris damage to Building 7. Jennings backed off his claims during a 2008 interview with the BBC, saying he didn't like the way he was portrayed in the film. He added, "I didn't appreciate that, so I told them to pull my interview," end quote. Now that is
unbelievable,
extremely deceptive passage in their book, because, one, Jennings was not the sole eyewitness for Building 7 controlled demolition scenario, as they say. We have other people who claim to have heard explosions coming from Building 7, people like Kevin McPadden and Craig Bartmer, who are on the site. Also, there's Michael Hess, who was with him, who at the time claimed he heard explosions. He's since retracted his claim about that, but there's some kind of funny business with that as well. The second thing they get wrong about in this passage is that they talk about NIST's timeline of events that suggests that the explosion that they experienced was just the North Tower coming down. The problem with that is that in NIST's timeline, they say that Barry Jennings and Michael Hess were rescued from the building at around 12 p.m. to 12:15 p.m., but the problem there is that David Ray Griffin researched this, and he found that when Hess testified on 9/11, when he was interviewed on TV, he was interviewed at 11:53, or 11:57 rather, that day, which of course is, well before the 12 p.m. to 12:15 p.m. that NIST claimed they were rescued. So obviously he couldn't have been interviewed, before he was rescued.
Absolutely.
The whole timeline suggests that Barry Jennings and Michael Hess were actually rescued at around 11:30, which, if that's the case, that means they would have been trapped at around 10 o'clock, basically, because Michael Hess in his interview said that they were trapped for about an hour and a half.
Right.
So if they had been trapped since 10 and then were rescued at 11:30, that would have given Hess enough time to make his way across town to City Hall, where he said he was interviewed, to give his interview just before noon. So the explosion couldn't have been caused by the North Tower coming down, because, of course, the North Tower collapsed at around 10:28, which would have been, well after they would have been trapped by this explosion.
Well, I watched the interview with Barry Jennings that he gave to Loose Change. Here's a quote directly from that interview. Both buildings were still standing. He said he was crystal clear. After walking on what he believed was dead bodies, after hearing these massive explosions that blew him from the 6th floor, that forced him to go back up to the 8th floor, after all that's happening, he confirmed that both buildings were still standing. Now, there's been debate about whether he saw the buildings that were still standing. Well, they're 110-story buildings. They're not that difficult to find. Some people say, well, he was on the north side of the tower. How could he see? But we know that he moved around in the tower. And the rest it is what it is. I think he also had the luxury of hearing the two towers fall later on. So when he's giving his story, he knows that obviously if the two towers just fell afterwards, then he knows for sure that both buildings were still standing. Go ahead, please.
No, and I want to add on to that, too. They talk about him, retracting his testimony. That video, that whole long, I think it's something like 20 minutes that Dylan Avery recorded with Barry Jennings, they held on to that because he had asked them to hold on to that because he was getting a lot of pressure and was scared, and only after BBC kind of, shoved him onto the camera and did this whole public disavowing session with him, did they release that. And if you watch that video, maybe I'll even link that up on 9/11 Free Fall again for people to see. I mean, you'll see it, like you said, Bernie, he's crystal clear about what he saw. So people need to know that background of what was going on behind the scenes as well. Absolutely. In relation to this.
Absolutely. So I think, and I know we're running out of time, so we're going to be looking to wrap this up. So I think what we see here clearly, Adam, there's a pattern of deception by popular mechanics. Nothing of what you said today to us, Adam, is scientific in terms of what popular mechanics has done. So they have not been part of the scientific picture that we're, and the true academic picture that we're trying to put out there with regard to 9/11. They have been involved clearly from what I'm hearing, and I wish we had more time to cover some of the other topics on this list. We talked on the list that you gave us. He addresses the Larry Silverstein Pullet quote. These guys are going for the whole thing when the political approach, and that is demonizing the truth, trying to discredit the science, discrediting firsthand testimonies, and this kind of tactic.
Mm-hmm. One last thing I just want to say real quick about the Barry Jennings issue, something for people to keep in mind. Anyone who thinks that the explosion he experienced was just the North Tower coming down, keep this in mind. Barry Jennings was on the north side of Building 7 when this happened. The stairwells are in the northern region of the building. The debris from the North Tower hit the south side of Building 7. So how falling debris hitting the south side could cause what Barry Jennings described as an upward explosive force that blew him backwards and knocked the landing out from under him all the way on the north side of the building. Yeah, how does that happen?
In the words, I know Barry Jennings described something to the effect that the lobby was so blown out that it looked like King Kong went through it. So, and this is, I'm glad we've been able to expose that for sure. Any last thoughts on this book by Popular Mechanics?
Just that I think it's a very poor book. Like I said, the structure of it's very bad. The information is very bad. on the structure of it alone, I mean, it's so badly put together, it really was more like a copy and paste job. You know, they clearly took stuff from their 2006 book and just copy and pasted the text where they saw fit into this new book. Even in Jim Megg's afterword in their 2011 book, it's the same afterword in the 2006 book, and you can tell because in his afterword he references something earlier in the book and references a page number, but in their new 2011 book, the page number he gives doesn't even correlate to the stuff he's talking about. So it's a bad copy and paste job, the whole book pretty much.
And you do a great job of breaking that down, and I just want to remind our audience, you know, we're giving you a taste here of Adam's article, but you can go ahead, go to 911freefall.com, and we're going to link to that and read it for yourself, where he, you know, really lays it out and points out how ridiculous popular mechanics arguments are.
Unbelievable. That what I've heard. Thank you so much, Adam Taylor, for sharing that information with us today about popular mechanics and giving us a chance to expose popular mechanics for what they are. Adam Taylor, people, right there. He is author, again, of Debunking the Real 9/11 Myths, Why Popular Mechanics Can't Face Up to Reality. We'll put all the links on 911freefall.com so that you can read this article, read some of Adam Taylor's work. Thanks, Adam. I want to thank you for coming on the show today and discussing this article and all this material on popular mechanics.
Thank you very much. And anyone listening who wants to know more about 9/11, more than just the demolition issue, please go to the site I write for, 911debunkers.blogspot.com, where I and many other great contributors to that site put out the best information we can to expose how the debunkers have it wrong and why we need a new investigation into the events of 9/11.
Well, we thank you so much for that, and we do hope our audience does go to that site and read a lot more of your work, and I thank you for doing this kind of work. I know I don't have the patience to deal sometimes with the debunkers, people like Popular Mechanics. It does take patience and a steady hand and that kind of commitment to the truth to keep doing what you're doing, Adam, so thanks again. All right, well, that does it for us this week. Thanks, everybody. And our guest was Adam Taylor, and I'm Bernie Suarez here with Andy Steele, and this is 9/11 Freefall, the radio show. Look for us online at 911freefall.com and at nolinesradio.org, as well as YouTube and everywhere else where people want to embed this show. So that's it, people. Until next week, thank you, and have a great day, everybody. Goodbye.